Is it inevitable that the Cowboys are just going to draft Ashton Jeanty at pick number 12? We'll discuss on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Elena McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And we are answering your Twitter questions today. Elena, we got a question last year. I was right around this time. Mm-hmm. Is it inevitable that the Cowboys are going to draft Tyler Guyton? And I remember you and I saying, no, there's lots of options, but it does feel like he's one of the favorites. And of course, that's who the Cowboys picked. This question from William. Sorry, we'll get to that one in a second. This question from at Micah the Goat, great Twitter handle. Does it feel inevitable that Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State, will be the pick for the Cowboys if he is still on the board?
No, I don't think it's inevitable. I mean, again, keep in mind that I am a guy who last year at this time of year told you that it isn't necessarily inevitable that Tyler Guyton will be the pick, but I don't think that these things are foregone conclusions. There's obviously reasons that players are listed as favorites. There's obviously reasons that professional mock drafters, line these things up, and part of the reason with that is that, man, they got to fit Ashton Jeanty somewhere in the first round. The Cowboys always seem like a great place to fit a running back, so they kind of just seemingly do this quite often.
By the way, I can't believe professional mock drafters is a thing, but it absolutely is. But go ahead.
I mean, I as it came out of my mouth, I'm like, is that a thing? And I'm like, yes, no, absolutely. 100%. That confirmed a thing. And look, I think, there's a need there. Clearly, the Cowboys don't have anything at the position really right now. I mean, obviously, we anticipate that they may make a play to try to re-sign Rico Dowdle, but we don't know. So there's obviously a need. There's a fit there. There's a history. He's from Frisco. He's from the Dallas area. He's a Dallas kid. There's lots to kind of point in that direction. There's lots of reason that there is so much smoke around that, but it certainly doesn't make it inevitable simply because at the end of the day, those aren't the things that are going to be the deciding factors as to who gets picked at 12 or wherever the Cowboys end up picking, right? It's about fit, positional value, all the other things that we discuss on this podcast all the time. So I certainly think that if we were going to take positional value out of all this and long-term planning and all that out of the question, I think as far as just a pure need and a fit situation, it makes a ton of sense. But that stuff does exist. Positional value does exist, and team long building does exist. So I think that there will be a lot of pushback there, and I think that there's a reason that you see more and more that professional mock drafters, PMDs as we call them, they are kind of moving away from Jeanty necessarily and mixing it up a little bit because we just don't know exactly where the Cowboys are going to go at this point.
Yeah, and we're going to do a podcast, I promised, on Ashton Jeanty. We'll do some in-depth scouting reports. We'll look at the advanced numbers. I promise that's coming. But one of the things that I struggle with is the Cowboys have spent a lot of money over the last couple of years building their analytics department. We haven't talked about this in a while, but all those guys stayed even when Mike McCarthy got fired. Yep. And it does seem like Brian Schottenheimer has a good connection with some of those guys. I know how some of them feel about the running back position in general. And I just wonder with the Cowboys, where they're at currently, with so many needs on both sides of the ball, are they even in a position where they can afford to draft a running back at 12? As great as Ashton Jeanty may be, there's a chance that they don't have a starting 3 technique going into the draft. There's a chance that they need a starting outside corner going into the draft. We know how good of a draft or how great of a draft this is when it comes to the running back position. I just wonder if they're going to look at it like, hey, we love Jeanty, but we've got other more pressing needs we've got to fill right away.
Well, I think that's part of the thing that a part of the unknown here is that I would even say that we don't even know what the Cowboys' needs are right now, right? Because they have such kind of a wide variety of free agents. I think obviously that some of them they're going to re-sign, and when they do re-sign them, then that kind of changes the power ranking of Cowboys' needs, right? So, yeah, absolutely. As it stands right now, I mean, they need a nickel quarterback, they need a 3 technique, they need offensive lineman, and so yeah, right. The numbers look large, and the positions that they need are many. But once that gets whittled down a little bit, that may change the angle. Look, this whole next segment, we'll talk about sequencing and where the best spot is to try to get all the needs you want with the available resources you have. But I think the other thing that we're not kind of throwing out here that is really hurting the Jeanty conversation in general is that this is an exceptional running back class.
Yeah.
I mean, top to bottom, we have a top end guy. You've got a really incredible second tier of running backs, and then like really a list of guys that you would feel solid about in a rotation that goes all the way probably through the 5th round. Right?
I saw Jordan Reed from ESPN tweeted this morning that he's got 36 draftable grades on running backs. He had 13 last year.
Yeah, so literally almost 3 times as many.
And a couple of different people have said this is like having 2 running back classes in one. That is going to hurt. I don't know if it's going to hurt Jeanty. I think Genty's still going to go high in this draft. I just think there's going to be some teams that feel like we've got to get this position first, and then let's worry about running back in rounds 2, 3, 4 because we're going to get a solid player. The other thing I wanted to mention is I do think the Cowboys are focusing on restoring their run game this offseason. That's clear, right? Like with the hiring Brian Schottenheimer as the head coach, bringing in Clayton Adams as their offensive coordinator. They've talked about improving the run game. That just doesn't necessarily mean first round running back. I think they're looking at this as not only a 2025 thing, but a long view of how to fix their running game. And I don't necessarily think, hey, as long as we draft Ashton Jeanty and bring back the same 5 offensive line starters that we had next year, we're going to be fine. I just don't think they view it that way.
Look, we've talked about this a little bit, but I think the important lesson that everyone needs to take away, and I think for the most part, people are taking away the wrong lesson from what happened with the Eagles and Saquon Barkley this year, right? Is that they're saying that because Saquon Barkley is an elite running back, that's everyone should be taking as an elite running back. Look what they did. And then they're lambasting the Giants for not taking advantage of having Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley had more yards before contact this season than he had total yards in any one season with the Giants. Think about that for a second. That he had more yards carrying the ball before being touched in total than he had in any other time of the Giants. That to me, again, screams that if you want to get the run game in order, first thing you need to do is get your offensive line and your scheme in order. Once that's in order, the running back is the cherry on top that can kind of maybe take it from good to elite. But that's the final piece. It's not the first piece you put in there. Yes. It's almost like a quarterback where you want to get it all in place, and then you want to get that elite running back if you want him on a rookie deal in a cheap contract and take advantage of him when he's young and cheap. But yeah, I think the idea of getting a running back when maybe you're kind of mid transition of figuring out your offensive line. We don't know what's happening with Zach Martin. We don't know who's playing right guard. Yep. Things are absolutely anything but settled. So settle the offensive line and the scheme first, then you can solve the running back problem if you want to, get a pick high. Otherwise, you don't really need to.
And the last thing on the Giants, the Eagles, there's no doubt that Saquon Barkley is a better player than what we've seen previously at running backs. However, for Miles Sanders had a Pro Bowl season. He was named to the Pro Bowl in 2022. He gets a big contract from the Panthers in 2023. He's a healthy scratch by like week 6 for the Panthers. 2023, we see DeAndre Swift have a Pro Bowl season. He was not a fit in Ben Johnson's offense with Detroit. They shipped him out of there. They didn't bring him back in free agency. He has his first Pro Bowl season with the Eagles in 2023. He gets a big deal. And now the Bears are already looking to replace him. So yes, Barkley is better than that, but that scheme in their offensive line is so good that they can turn just about any decent running back into a Pro Bowl running back. That's what we should be looking for here in Dallas. Like, get the scheme right, get the offensive line right, and then 2-3 years from now, if the right running back comes in the draft, go get him, but fix everything else before you worry about the single running back early.
Yeah, create the stability to have a good run system in-house so you
Yes.
can, just drop in running backs as you need them year in and year out and cycle through them very quickly. It starts with the offensive line. It starts with the scheme.
All right, let's talk about running back or wide receiver in free agency. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Are you looking for tickets for your next big event? Maybe last minute tickets to the big game this weekend? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Gametime Picks, the app does all of the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste your time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Gametime Picks for a while now. I absolutely love it. One of my favorite parts is that you get the seat view feature. It's an absolute game changer. Before you hit buy, you're going to know exactly what your seats look like in the venue. It is so reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal elsewhere, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering your mailbag questions. And this one comes from Goran, a longtime listener of the show. He wants to know, Marcus, you mentioned that the Cowboys could choose to shore up either wide receiver or running back in free agency before the draft. Which short-term bridge option at receiver or running back makes the most sense here?
Look, I think personally, running back is a position that you probably need to hit both, right? Like you need to hit the draft and you need to hit free agency. I think wide receiver it's interesting, right? Because there are definitely guys like the market is actually quite good for wide receivers, especially the wide receivers you're looking for, right? Wide receiver twos, guys that you're not like relying on being the kind of main focus of the passing game, but who can come in, who can win on one-on-one coverage. There are guys out there that are available for that. I think running back is really kind of bare in a lot of ways. I mean, I know Rico Dowdle is a free agent. I think Aaron Jones is probably one of the bigger free agents as well. But outside of that, there aren't a ton. I think, did you say Josh Jacobs is also?
No, it's really rough. It's Najee, Rico,
not yours, yeah.
Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, and Javonte Williams are your top running backs.
So, I mean, I think the face you made is pretty apt. And look, the other thing too here is I just said it. The running back draft is incredibly deep. So, I think that a lot of teams are going to be probably, doing a lot of research there and trying to get younger, cheaper, maybe just slightly less talented guys on, deals that they can get that are less than the vet minimum. I think that that's probably where a lot of teams are going to go unless they are in a desperate need situation. I think for the Cowboys, you like Rico Dowdle, and I think you probably want to bring him back. The question is like, what's that number going to look like? The market in general is going to be very interesting for running backs because of, like you said, the competing factors, right? Like the money's going to be pushed up because there's scarcity in the market. There aren't a lot of good running backs. However, the numbers also going to be pushed down because there is not scarcity in the draft. So it will be interesting to see what he comes in at.
So I wrote an article that for 3013 that's coming out on Thursday, projecting the top running back salaries. And for Rico, I'm guessing it's going to be like 2 years, 10 million. If that's the number for Rico, would you just sign that and move on to the next position?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I think you sign that with the idea that you're still going to get
that's the idea
back of some
but at least that gives you some protection going into the draft. Like, hey, if we don't get a running back in the first 3 rounds, at least we know we have an NFL starter.
Yeah, I mean, again, it provides a floor, but you're trying to improve on the situation you had last year. But look, I mean, Rico gave you nothing but reasons to re-sign him. He showed you that he can do it and he can carry it on a sole basis if he needs to. I think he probably would be better as part of a duo that has somebody with a little bit more dynamic skill set and as the kind of secondary back, which again, why we say Trayvon Henderson and some of these guys.
The hard part is like we saw Zach Moss, who the Cowboys liked a lot last year.
Yeah.
He went for 2 years, $8 million, and Dallas felt like that was out of their price range. So is Rico Dowdle going into his age 27 season? Do they want to give him $5 million a year? I don't know. Like I don't know what happens if some team, let's say some team offers Rico 1 year, $7.5 million. I don't know what Dallas does there.
I think we need to start like having a separate conversation about like it was last year's look, the Cowboys overall is not a free agency spending team. Like that's clear.
No,
I do think that even beyond that, last year was an anomaly.
But I just don't know. I get the sense that there might be one more year of that coming before
maybe
like one more of these reset years in year one of Brian Schottenheimer before we see them getting back to being like, okay, we're going to retain a lot of these guys at reasonable prices.
But having said that, I do think that another thing that the Cowboys do is they defer to their guys, right? So
they do.
I will say that I think the one reason that I think that they may be willing to pay Rico 210 versus Zach Moss 2.8 is that they know Rico Dowdle. He's been in this building before. That has value clearly above and beyond things. So it's a true floor for them because there's not unknown about who Zach Moss is and what he's going to be like in the locker room. They know who that dude is. So we'll see. Again, lots of kind of competing angles, things like different pressures pushing on a bottom and top.
Well, let's talk about the free agent receivers because there are a lot of receivers in this free agent class. This is one of the better free agent classes we've seen in a while, especially if you're looking for a number 2 receiver. Now, I think like T. Higgins and Chris Godwin are way outside of what Dallas is going to pay for a number 2 receiver. But the rest of the names are interesting. Let's just run through a few of them really, really quickly. Amari Cooper will be 31 this year.
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously these look. I think we need to kind of also take a step back. This is a conversation you and I had before the show. I wonder if this new commitment to kind of a holistic approach to the running game also might have an effect on who they want to bring in as a wide receiver, right?
I would agree. Somebody that can block, you can dig out some of the linebackers in the run game, all that kind of
stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not like we're like that's the first trait we're looking for.
No, but you have to check that box of like willing blocker.
I think it can be a disqualifying thing. It's almost like hand size. We talk about with quarterbacks. Yeah. We're getting into that season, guys. We're almost in hand size season, where it's not like he needs to have 10-inch hands to be a good thrower of the football. It's like I just don't want you to have 8.5-inch hands where I feel like you can't hold on to the ball when Micah Parsons is tomahawking down on your arm. So I think that's kind of where it is too with the wide receivers and blocking is that you need somebody that you feel like is going to be willing, because that's how you produce splash plays in the running game, right? Is that you have wide receivers, tight ends blocking in the second and third levels. Okay, so bringing this back to Amari Cooper, I don't know if he fits that bill necessarily, right? I do think the idea of that type of player, like the guy who you can trust to get open on one-on-one coverage because he's going to see a lot of one-on-one coverage opposite of CeeDee Lamb, I think that's something that's valuable. I just feel like if you can get somebody who could do that, that's maybe a little bit cheaper, that also would be a more well-rounded wide receiver, that might be a better situation.
Yeah, Pro Football Focus has Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, all getting like somewhere between 15 and 17 million a year. That just might be out of their price range for a wide receiver 2 receiver. A wide receiver 2 in free agency. Now, a couple of the other guys down the list, like if you want to try to find some value, Hollywood Brown, who's going to only be 28, played with CeeDee Lamb at Oklahoma. He gives you some speed, doesn't give you any of the blocking ability. Darius Slayton, another receiver, 28 years old, gives you some speed down the field, not really a blocker as well. It just gets really hard to what's the right price point to try to find somebody here? This is where I wonder, if the best option just isn't to bring back Brady Cooks at 1 year, $6 million, and then just go into the draft with who you have.
Or you could get on that Deontay Johnson,
no, I'm not
Mike Williams roller coaster if you want, that is seemingly very popular this season.
Cooper Kupp
No.
is another one we should mention.
Yeah.
I know that people are mentioning him for the Cowboys. Now he will block, but I
The
don't
thing
see
that's interesting there is that when I saw that was actually you and I had a funny thing where I saw the reaction to all this, and I thought that what it was happening was that the Rams were asking him to take a pay cut. But then later on, when I figured out, no, they're actually trying to trade him, I was like, there is no way that they're going to be able to trade Cooper Kupp at that age with the injury situation, with that money that he's got available. Somebody pointed out, and I think that this is interesting, worth mentioning, that the Rams have been in the past and might be willing to take on some of that money in order to facilitate a trade to get a draft pick. So I wonder if that does change the angles for some teams. I don't know if it changes the angles for the Cowboys necessarily, because even though you're right, even though he can block, you worry about his ability to get open now that he may have lost some explosiveness on the other side of these injuries. He's 32 years old. He's still going to be pricey. I don't, and he doesn't give you really explosiveness.
No, it is a guy that needs to play in the slot. And I always get worried when a quarterback's favorite receiver and a coach's favorite receiver is just being traded, like at the end of this year. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. And I'll say this too, even though the wide receiver undrafted market is a lot better than the running back market is, for what the Cowboys are looking for, the wide receiver draft class is also very incredible, right? Like, because the Cowboys are looking obviously not for a number one wide receiver. And if you're looking for that, you're in trouble. Like you need to get a guy, you need to draft in the top 10. If you don't get McMillan or obviously Travis Hunter or Burton. I mean, even Burton to me is like a very high end two, I feel like, right? So but this class has got a lot of those kind of guys. The Cowboys could always go to the draft class if they wanted to get a nice wide receiver too. There's lots of guys available that kind of fit the bill. But I would say that if you're forced to choose between taking one position in the draft and taking one position in free agency, the market in the free agent market for wide receivers gives you a lot more choice. So there are more options there. However, I still think that the Cowboys go the other route. I think they'd likely sign Rico and then they draft both a wide receiver and a free agent. I tend to draft a running back.
Yeah, I tend to agree. That's my guess. They try to bring back Rico, and then in the first 2 days of the draft, they're going to bring a receiver, a running back, and probably some kind of defensive player. I want to talk about the offensive line, Landon, because it's clear the Cowboys are going to try to re-emphasize that position, re-emphasize the run game. How does this become a top unit in 2025? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. Pair that with one other correct pick, and you are cashing in. This week, I'm looking for the more on Travis Kelce yards. I just think Patrick Mahomes is going to pepper him with targets in the biggest game of the year. Go download the app and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Landon, let's get to this question from William. He wants to know, what has to happen for this offensive line to become a top 5 unit next year? In which positions will require outside additions?
Wow, that's a good question. I certainly think that this is something that they are prioritizing in a way that they haven't previously, right? I think that they're, we talked about it before, that it felt like at times that despite the fact that the Cowboys are committed to the offensive line, it's part of their team identity. that this team spent entirely too long kind of resting on the laurels of Zach Martin and Tyron Smith being here, and that being enough for this, offensive line to be great. I like the way that they've decided to kind of structure the offense coordinator, bringing in someone who is clearly going to have a lot of a say in this offense to be the offensive line coach. I think that's the first step. Bringing in a new guy who's going to add a level of variety to the run game, is going to try some new things in protections as well. First of all, I think it helps to accentuate the strengths of the guys that you have on the roster. And then on top of that, I think when you have a system that's committed to running the football, it's easier for the offensive linemen to buy into it, right? Yeah. Because they want to move forward. They want to attack and come downhill. They obviously, pass blocking is not passive, but I think the ability to come at defensive linemen, move forward, knock guys back, that's what gets offensive linemen up in the morning. So just making a commitment to the offensive line being closer to that, I think, is a good step forward. As far as personnel goes, the good news for the Cowboys is that I don't feel like they're terribly far off, even if Zach Martin doesn't come back, right?
Well, we should also have a conversation about Zach Martin, because he was at Radio Row yesterday saying he doesn't know what he wants to do. It's going to depend on his health and his foot. And to me, I'm just reading to you, it sounded like he'd like to play one more year. Wasn't that your takeaway?
I think somebody that isn't sure if they want to play football or not is probably retired. I don't know. I think it takes a lot of commitment. Maybe he does want to come back one more year. I felt like this is pretty wishy-washy at this late in the season. Do you
think some of it just depends on how quickly his foot gets healthy?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the ankle is going to dictate a lot. Zach Martin is a very proud guy, right? And if he comes back from dealing with the ankle and he still isn't the same guy that he was before, I mean, look, I don't know Zach Martin, but I have a feeling that he does not want to go through what he went through last year. That what he put out on tape was not Zach Martin, right?
He just had one of his quotes is like he said something to the effect of like, "Hey, I'm a free agent too," which is like
I didn't hear that quote.
It's like he's like, pay me the right amount of money and I'll come back, right?
Yeah, and look, I think that's a legitimate question. I mean,
do you pay him
I hate saying this,
but a year for 1 year?
Like, what's the money? Because ultimately you can't get a commitment that you're going to get the same Zach Martin back until you've already signed him, right? So
yeah, I mean,
what he put on tape last year was troubling, and I'll go as far as to say I love Zach Martin as much as any player the Cowboys have ever had. We talked about this, but once he got removed from the lineup after I understand he's injured, and if he's a lot better, then we shouldn't be having this conversation. But once they took him out of the lineup, the offensive line played better, because it just was a healthier offensive line. Yeah. So if he's physically able to, then we could talk. But again, what's that number? What's that number look like? And is it worth it? So look, they got to figure out right guard to kind of answer the question. They got to figure out right guard. Right tackle is really the position that I can't quite figure out where I'm at, right? Where a part of me thinks you give Steele one more year under a new offensive line coach to see what he has, because you do like some of the makeup of what Steele has. But at the same time, you also have a couple of different guys that you would like to maybe see at different spots, including right tackle. I wouldn't mind seeing Guyton at right tackle. I wouldn't mind seeing Awesome Richards get a shot at one of these spots to see if he can do it. I also wouldn't mind if the Cowboys drafted a tackle, and try to replace them. So I think that there's lots of ways to do this. However, I will say this last thing. The Clayton Adams is pretty famous for taking all types of guys and putting them in the starting lineup. You'll see a first round pick next to an undrafted free agent on his offensive line. So I think that this dude's talented enough that he can find guys wherever. That to me reads like he probably should be able to make something with what they have already in house. Maybe they add one more piece, but like a Will Hernandez, if he's
there you go. So that's what I was going to say. I'm open to every possible solution here. Like, What if the idea was we're just going to try to get their best 5 on the field? To us, that means Tyler Smith at left tackle. We move Tyler Guyton to right tackle. We cut Terrence Steele to save some money. We bring in somebody like Will Hernandez, and we've got Will Hernandez, Cooper Beebe, and Brock Hoffman up front. Now, that's not ideal, but maybe that's your best 5 offensive linemen, and that's how you go forward. Or maybe you go out and spend some of that money on a free agent guard. I'm open to any potential option here to try to get this offensive line back to being the best they can.
I thought about this the other day. Like, let's say that if you feel like right now, hey, the way the situation is, Osa walking out the door. If we let Osa walk, we have to draft a defensive lineman to replace him. What if instead you cut Terrence Steele? You take the money that you save you post June. I think you get something close to like $10 million.
Something like that.
You put that money towards Osa, re-sign him. And then now you're using that draft pick on a right tackle or a left tackle, and you're moving Guyton to the other side. I do agree.
Will Campbell, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. I do agree that I think that there are lots of ways to fix this. But the good news for the Cowboys is they're not 3 or 4 pieces away. I don't think. I think they
1.5.
1.5, and then on top of that, like once they have the starting situation solved, they've got innumerable backups. They got tons of backups already. So that's nice to have that built in already.
Yeah. All right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, we are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.